So good morning, everyone. My name's James Walsh. I'm Head of Membership Engagement here at the PLSA. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this PLSA webinar, and we'll be giving you an advanced view of the PLSA's proposals on the next steps for the DC decumulation freedoms. We've got 240 people registered to participate this morning. I do hope you will all participate by answering the poll questions we'll be putting up and sending me some questions for our speakers to answer. I'm joined this morning by my colleague Lizzy Holliday, who heads our DC work here at the PLSA, and also by Emma Douglas, Head of DC at Legal and General Investment Management. And Emma somehow finds time in her busy day job to also chair the PLSA's Policy Board, which oversees the work that Lizzy and her policy colleagues do. So welcome to Lizzy and Emma. So we're going to kick off setting the scene with some polling questions to find out about who you are, who the audience are. So a poll question should appear magically on your screens now, and there it is. Is your scheme a master trust, a single employer trust-based scheme, or a group personal pension? And I can see, and I hope you can see the results. So 45% of you are running single employer trusts, 29% running master trusts, and 25% have a GPP. So it's quite an array of different types of scheme represented this morning. Okay, let's have the next question, which is, does your DC scheme or section offer decumulation products? This will be interesting to see. So 55% of your schemes don't offer a decumulation solution to your members at the moment, but 30% do. So that's quite a significant number. 14% not sure, it may not be, because they're quite so clear. And then we've got one more question at the moment, which is, do you agree that, and it should appear on your screen, do you agree that savers need support at retirement with their decumulation decisions? I know which way I would vote on this. So do you agree that savers need support at retirement with their decumulation decisions? And I think we can close that now because it's an overwhelming slam dunk for yes. 99% of you say yes, and I don't know who the 1% is who said not sure. We'll follow up with that person later. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Emma Douglas. Emma, you're going to start us off by explaining the work the PLSA has done previously on these decumulation issues. Emma.
That's great, James. Thanks very much. Really good to see that very positive response. So this seminar is definitely needed, I feel. So in 2018, PLSA produced the Hitting the Target report. So I was part of the steering group, which is chaired by Richard Butcher. Now, as well as laying the foundations for the retirement living standards, the report also covered a number of other areas in its overall vision for retirement income adequacy. And one of those was the proposal for a new regulatory framework for decumulation. So the idea was really to encourage those who were happy to do so to make an active decision about how to spend their retirement monies, but also to offer a route that could provide a suitable option for those that just didn't engage. And the role of trustees and IGCs would be to select suitable options and to signpost members towards these solutions. And importantly, given that we have a lot of single employer trust schemes here today, these solutions could be provided in scheme or separately via signposting. And some of the principles that could form part of a suitable solution were discussed as well, such as the need to provide a regular income, as most members actually say they want this, but also some flexibility for capital withdrawals. And the principles also discussed the need to avoid complex decisions in later life, allowing for dementia risk, and the need for protection against outliving your savings. Now, value for money would be an important consideration in the decumulation world, and there would be a role for the government in supporting standards. So since hitting the target, the PLSA exec, policy committees and the policy board have been seeking to translate this policy position into some tangible deliverables So something that really works for schemes and for savers, and very much in the context of an evolving market and evolving regulatory response to the pension freedoms. So PLSA will be issuing a call for evidence on these more detailed proposals in the next week or so. But really, we wanted an opportunity to share and explore our ideas with members via a webinar ahead of that launch. So hence why we're meeting today. So let's go on to the next slide. So in developing this further detail, we've needed to address a few key challenges. So they're outlined on this slide. And I'm just going to pick them off with Lizzy for some exploration, as they're really key context for the solution that we're recommending. So the first one, member engagement. I don't think I need to tell this audience, it's a really big ticket issue. Most of the schemes I work with, it's the #1 concern for them. So, you know, as we know, government policy uses inertia to get people into pension savings. And yeah, auto-enrollment has been a great success. The things that we tried before that weren't actually so successful. But, you know, we've got 10 million new savers into auto-enrollment. But of course, because it's automatic, it hasn't necessarily created much engagement. So I do see a lot of triple defaulters. So people who remain in the default fund at the default contribution rate and the default retirement age. And, you know, while remaining on these factory settings might not be such a big problem in accumulation, it does create much more of an issue where members are now faced with a much more complex set of choices at retirement. Now, Pensionwise has been helping some of those people who are accessing their money at retirement, but it's only around half of them. So I don't think we've got a full solution here. So Lizzy, can you just give us a bit of a taster on what we've done with this conundrum?
Yeah, sure. So the big challenge here is how far is it actually possible and practical to use inertia for the decumulation options? They're so much more complex and so much less binary than the decision about whether to opt in to stay in a pension scheme. So, and also far more complex to know what's right for an individual person or for the general membership. But we do think we've got a solution that gets the balance just about right. And so this would be an approach that uses nudge and sort of like a path of least resistance for the saver. But it doesn't take the path of a true default or an opt-out. So it's not about putting people into certain decumulation options. It's about supporting them and helping them towards what might be appropriate. But we can come on to that in a little bit more detail a little bit later.
Thanks, Lizzy. So the second point is, you know, act now and future proof. So we do need to look at what's achievable now and, of course, what we want the future to look like. So from my experience at Legal & General, we have an average DC pot size of around £18,000 at retirement. And quite naturally, overwhelmingly, these pots are being taken as cash. However, it's quite interesting to see for those pots that are over £30,000, more than half are accessing these pots gradually, either as regular income or as a series of lump sums. And given that DC pots will increase over time as more and more members become reliant on their DC monies as the main source of their retirement income, I think it is fair to say that for decumulation, if you build it, they will come. So Lizzy, how can we build something now that will also stand the test of time?
Yeah, so another big challenge, it's quite easy to see, I think, an end vision of what we think savers need in retirement and what the ideal kind of product might look like. But we're trying to deal with this scenario where there are different levels of savings, there's different cohorts, different demographics, and we also know that's going to change over time. So what we've tried to do is respond to kind of an imperative to act now, because people are having to make these decisions, they're taking these options now. We're also in a very uncertain economic environment where some of those risks may play out over the next couple of years for savers in a particular way. So we're kind of looking at the need to act now, but also trying to shape how the future might evolve. So looking at things like the product standards that Emma referred to earlier, and we'll come on to in a bit more detail later. So it's about providing support now, but seeking to provide support in a way that seeks to influence some of the supply side in the way that products might evolve and how things might improve into the future.
Great. Let's move on to the risks now then, Lizzy. So one thing that came across loud and clear in our discussions with policy committees and definitely at the policy board was the level of risks that schemes felt that they were facing in this environment. You know, whether that was in taking action to support their savers or indeed in taking no action at all. So, for example, you know, the risks for schemes and trustees, you know, they're really worried about stepping into what could be seen as the advice space. There's concerns about litigation, about taking on responsibility into the retirement space, the costs of administering these options and solutions, and for single employer schemes, you know, the role of the employer perhaps in having to stand behind some of these risks. And then for others, the risks of not taking action are also the really big concern, because the need for members to have more support seemed very much apparent. And then, of course, for savers, you know, compared to the pre-freedom system, the risks that they now face include things like market performance and investment risk, the risk of running out of money in retirement due to overspending or due to investment performance, or the risks of living too poorly in retirement because they're so worried about that problem of running out of money. You know, the risks of needing to manage their pension savings and drawdown because they might live a very long time, you know, and of course, as well as the significant information asymmetry risk when they go out to the market to try and find a solution or a product. So Lizzy, I think that covers some of the key risks that we've heard discussed at our various committees and policy board. But, you know, is there anything else that we need to take away to inform our solution?
Yeah, so the only thing I'd add to that is really how we've tried to pick off the key risks, so the things that are barriers to schemes to be able to act in this space, and also the key risks to savers in the choices that they face. But it's not just about what would address that risk directly, it's about how to address the risk. So it's about using the appropriate levers that are available to us as kind of influencers or policymakers to see what might actually really kind of make a change in how things are working at the moment. So it's the solution to key risks plus the levers to use to address those risks, I think.
Great. And then moving on to the final point on this slide, responses. You know, obviously things have not stood still. So, you know, we have reviewed as PLSA various responses by savers to the freedoms, you know, looked at literature reviews, and clearly it's been a lot from the FCA in their retirement outcome review and the findings. And there's also been, you know, many reports on this issue over the last few months, covering, you know, issues faced by savers and also issues faced by schemes. And we've also commissioned some of our own PLSA research into the trust-based market, and findings show that there's a real range of scheme responses and experience for savers in the trust-based market. And we have also, of course, seen the regulators responding in various ways. So, you know, the FCA investment pathways for providers, and of course, there's indications that the DWP will be considering some activity in this space as well. So, you know, Lizzy, do we really need more proposals given all we've got here?
Unfortunately, yes, or fortunately, yes. So we've seen lots of reports coming out flagging lots of the issues, but what we're hoping we're doing with our report that we'll be launching next week is to offer a solution and to look at something quite concrete and quite deliverable, and one that's based on what we've had from the extensive conversations we've had so far with members, and hope to continue to do so during the corporate evidence period. We do recognise the FCA pathways have a really important part to play in mitigating an immediate risk. But we do think the solution we have in mind is a little bit broader, a little bit more holistic, offers something a bit extra. And it's, you know, it's always important with these kind of areas where, with the types of risks we're talking about, that we keep moving things forward in an appropriate and proportionate way. So I think there's always space to do more, and we're hoping we've got the right balance here.
Great. So before we get into more detail on what we're actually proposing, James, I think you've got a couple more polling questions to make sure that our audience is still with us. So I'm going to hand back to you, James.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, so that's great context. And yeah, we've got a couple of questions, if we can perhaps put the first one up to get some feedback from our audience on these risks to schemes and to savers. So the first question is, how do you rate the risks in the current system in terms of risk to schemes? And if you could rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being low risk and 5 being high risk. So this is all about your assessment of the current risk to schemes. So this is quite interesting, quite a distribution of results I can see there. So quite evenly spread really around the middle, with obviously our audience thinking there's a sort of degree of risk to schemes at the moment, but not sort of very low and not very high either. Let's move on to the next question, which is a variant of a previous one. So it's, how do you rate the risks in the current system in terms of risk to savers? So all about savers, and again, with 1 being low risk for savers and 5 being high risk. So I think we're going to see a slightly different distribution of results here. Unlike previously saying, there is a really high risk in this case to savers. So quite a range of views among our audience there. So Emma and Lizzie, I'm going to hand back to you. We've got some feedback there on what our members think of a risks in the current system. I suppose the big question now is about our proposal. What is the PLSA planning to propose we do about all this?
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, the poll was interesting. It did look like that, you know, our participants today were much more worried about the risk being disproportionately on savers. And I think personally, I would agree with that. So perhaps if we can move on to the next slide and let's get into what our proposals are. So we have 3 key parts. So firstly, an obligation on schemes to support members in relation to decumulation. So either by offering a solution or by signposting one. Then secondly, this obligation is made up of 3 key elements. So member engagement, and then a decumulation product solution, either provided or signposted to, and then some governance processes around that. And then thirdly, there will be standards that apply to each of these 3 elements. So, Lizzy, let's go first off to that statutory obligation point, because wishing for more regulation is something I've always been wary of. So can you give us some more details on why we are proposing something as stringent as a statutory obligation here?
Yeah, I guess there were 2 distinct drivers for this. I think one of those was coming from the extent of risk that we're hearing about from a scheme perspective from our discussions at policy board and policy committees, in terms of the clarity on whether it's appropriate to act in that space, some of the risks that acting in that space might bring in terms of litigation, and some of the risks that you're talking about earlier, Emma. And so we did bat around quite a few different solutions about how we could address that risk for schemes. And we talked about things like providing a safe harbour where schemes to act in this space, but also quite conscious that safe harbour is not something government does very often, and we wanted to make sure the solution that we put on the table was something that wouldn't completely fall over if one of the key ingredients, one of the key things to mitigate the risk to schemes actually turned out not to be deliverable by government. I think the other kind of angle on that is kind of reflecting back on the polls and the perception of the risk to savers that we've just seen. It's also about providing a minimum standard. We can see in the decumulation landscape research that there's a lot of varied practice out there. So there's an element here as well of making sure there's clarity over how what schemes might be able to do, and giving them some protection that there's a requirement there to do it and the way that they might be able to fulfill it in order to kind of raise that bar a little bit. But it's also kind of closely tied in with the 3 elements and standards, so that it's about basically giving schemes a clear space to work in, and to provide some of those options with reducing risk to them as well. We're also kind of like a third angle, we're also conscious that DWP are thinking about acting in this space. I think we can say it's highly unlikely they won't regulate in this area at some point. So this is also about making sure that we are shaping that solution, that we are influencing it, making it deliverable, and making it manageable and tangible as well. So there's kind of a 3-pronged approach there. It's kind of looking at the risk to schemes that we had heard to date, looking at the risk to savers and the baseline there. But it's also about being realistic that government is very likely to regulate in this area, and how do we envisage that as a PLSA? How as an industry would we like that to happen?
And so similarly, Lizzy, I presume the 3 key elements relate back to the risks that we've talked about earlier?
Yeah, that's right. So Emma, you were outlining, you know, the risk to members in terms of running out of money or not spending enough money and living too poorly, having to deal with market fluctuation, having to engage all the way through retirement, not just at the decumulation point with some of these products. And so the circle around the decumulation products solutions and having standards around those is all about trying to shape the future, what those products might look like, to try and help support what trustees might need to consider as they're kind of looking at their signposting options. So the decumulation products one is broadly about saver risk. The member engagement point is also about saver risk and saver awareness. It's part of the solution around nudge that we talked about earlier. And the scheme governance circle there is kind of representing what schemes were saying to us about risks that they would face in delivering these kind of things. So the risks in delivering signposting, the risks in thinking about what products are appropriate, the risks in delivering the member engagement at the right level, taking into account what we know about engagement and what communication solutions might be there. So the scheme governance processes were sort of fairly focused on what schemes were telling us the risk to them might be in delivering some of this and how they might go about mitigating some of those within their own governance processes.
And then the standards, Lizzie, how do these fit in? So, you know, are we saying we want more regulation, or are these industry-based standards? Perhaps actually we go on to the next slide, that will give us a framework that you could take us through.
Cool, yeah, so big question here is or the things we need to think about include, if we have a statutory obligation, what is going to support schemes to deliver against that and have the clarity of expectation, clarity of what is expected from schemes, a clarity about what consumers can expect from them, and so that they can fulfill that statutory obligation in the most efficient and informed way. So there's one angle where you might say, well, that might mean the standards look like regulations, but there's another angle to it, which might be that actually, if there's sufficient industry guidance or guidance from the regulator that kind of explains exactly what fulfilling that statutory obligation might look like, that might be sufficient. The other angle comes back to the baseline point we were making about earlier, and this is about kind of trying to provide a bit of consistency for savers across the industry, but especially in this particular case that I'm talking about at the moment in the trust-based sector, about what they might expect to experience, given they're likely to have pots in lots of different places. So the factors we're kind of exploring through the call for evidence include where should these levers be used and which levers should be used for which element. So you could see a fairly traditional approach that has a statutory obligation, which is underpinned by regulations, and then you get some regulator guidance, and then you might get some industry best practice laid on top of that. But I think what we're keen to hear about is where people are comfortable and what they feel would address the kind of dual aspect of protecting savers and supporting savers, as well as supporting schemes in the delivery and sort of mitigating some of the risks that they were concerned about too.
And then Lizzie, before we go on to our final set of polling questions, do you feel we've explained what the solution is in enough detail? Maybe take us into a little bit more of, rounding out that solution and how you think it would actually look in practice.
Yeah, so would it be helpful to kind of pop into some examples about maybe some of the standards in this space?
Yeah, I think that would, give us a little bit more meat on the bones for this discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, so the call for evidence will go through some suggestions around some of the specific measures that sit under the three arms, so the member engagement, the product solutions, and the governance elements. So in terms of member engagement, obviously quite a difficult line to tread here in terms of expectations about what kind of level of engagement you can expect to get from a consumer at this point in their kind of life cycle of saving. So the emphasis there will sort of be on communication, so informing people, as probably already happens through wake-up packs and other good practice within lots of schemes, around telling members about what their options are. I think there'll be some elements in there around timings, about the key information the scheme should be offering, about examples of how to prepare for decumulation, about signposting off to other sources, because what we're not trying to do here is we're not trying to put the trustee or the scheme in the place of an advisor. So that's something we're definitely not trying to do. So some of the standards will be about signposting people off to those other avenues. I think some of the messaging in there also are things that we've had from members. If people have got lots of different pots, then there might need to be some messages about consolidation, about the timing of that, about the things they might need to take into account. So again, it's kind of all information provision at this stage. And then there might be kind of an option in there for schemes to be looking at how they provide a sort of opt-in to a signposted route, so that you're picking up members there that understand what the offer is and that are willing to say or happy to say, I'd really like your help with this. I'd really like to see what you would like to signpost me to, and I'm likely to take that avenue. I think in terms of the products and solutions, this is where we're in the space of standards that help to mitigate the risk for savers. So the types of things we're looking at here are the principles, Emma, that you outlined at the beginning that we're now hitting the target publication. So a little bit around there, around when trustees are thinking about offering a solution or signposting to a solution, the elements we'd like them to think about in terms of those standards are having a relatively consistent income in retirement, having protection against longevity and decision risk, and some flexibility for capital withdrawals. So this is all about trustees considering those factors. So this is also about creating a space for innovation and trying to shape the future market as well. In terms of governance, there was a lot that kind of felt very intuitive to the schemes that we spoke to about the kinds of governance structures that might help support the delivery of these functions. And so things that we've got in there are sort of helpful, or what we hope are helpful, hints and tips and suggestions around the due diligence around selecting products, which can lean on the product standards. Also about implementing processes concerning the investment approach that's being adopted, either where people aren't responding to the signposting and so need to stay within the scheme, but also for the decumulation product as well. So also that includes a whole value for money assessment, Emma, that I think you referred to at the beginning as well. And looking at processes for reviewing that ongoing offer, because one of the risks that schemes were sort of talking to us about were the litigation risk, and once somebody had gone into a product, what are the risks of that in terms of the ongoing management of it. So there's some elements in there which are about reviewing on an ongoing basis. So there's a lot more detail in the document when it comes out, but that's a flavour of the type of things that we've been looking at so far. And obviously we're expecting and very hopeful for lots of comments on that detail.
That's great, Lizzie, thanks. Yes, so you know, it's still early stage consultation. We want your views, but James, I think you've got a couple of final questions to ask our audience now.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions to put up to get some initial reaction to these proposals, and those should be coming up in just a second, I hope. Here we are, and I think there's two questions together here. I think you can actually answer them at the same time. So the first one is, how well do you think the proposed solution addresses the risk to schemes? And that's again a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very well and 5 being excellent. And then the second question, just a little lower down, is again about savers. How well do you think the proposal addresses the risk to savers? And in terms of the first question, how else does the proposal address the risk to schemes? Well, that seems pretty positive. 41% of people's giving it sort of a 4 out of 5, which is quite nice, and 41% a bit more in the middle, so we may just need to persuade those people. And there's encouragingly few rating it very poorly. In terms of risk to savers, kind of similar numbers. So Emma, Lizzy, I think we've got a sort of a moderately positive reaction from there, which suggests to me we're on the right lines, but there's obviously scope for us to fine tune and maybe even strengthen and refine these proposals a little. So just one last question from me to you two, which is about, as we run through the slides, which is about the timeline. And Emma, I think you were going to tell us a bit about what's the timeline for next steps on this work.
Yeah, absolutely, James. So if we can go on to the next slide, that reveals the timeline to us. So the call for evidence is due to be published in the coming week, and it will be really, really great to have all your comments and contributions on that. Yes, you know, it's encouraging to see some overall positivity about what we're proposing, but clearly there will be some things that can be improved, and that's why we really want your input on our ideas here. We'll be running some events over the summer, and then we'll be drawing some conclusions come early autumn, ready for final proposals in October. And there's deliberately a blank box on the end there as well, because this will have to be an evolving solution. you know, these issues that we've talked about today are actually pretty complex, and we know that the regulatory framework is evolving around us as well. So we will definitely need ongoing work to keep these proposals fresh. But for now, I think that we're ready to answer questions, and I think James is going to moderate that for us.
Thank you. I am, Emma. And first question, just one technical one came in from Judith Codling asking, are we recording this? The answer is yes, we are, and we'll be sending a recording round with the slides tomorrow, I believe. So look out for that. So we've got some questions coming in. I'm going to run through some of them. Do type some more in the Q&A box. So let's see. Let's go first to a question that came in from Adrian Boulding. I'm sure I saw one from him. He asks, why do the panel think that the majority, that's 56% in today's poll that we took earlier, 56% of DC schemes are today offering no decumulation products? So Emma or Lizzie, why do you think the majority of schemes are not offering decumulation products at the moment?
I think that probably plays to the fact that we've got quite a lot of single employer trust-based schemes on the line. And, you know, although there are some rare unicorns out there that do offer, you know, in-scheme drawdown, in-scheme pension freedoms, they're very few and far between. And, you know, I think it's really hard if you're a single employer trust to say, well, why would I do this myself in scheme, taking on all of those risks that we've talked about for people that are no longer working for the current employer. So, you know, generally in market, I found that single employer trust-based schemes don't want to offer their own decumulation products for reasons I think are very understandable. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't keen to help their members. And that's where we've come up with the idea of this signposting. So you don't have to offer these things in scheme, but you do have to think about how can your members get access to something that will provide them with all of the flexibilities that they need and all of the protections that we've talked about as well. Now, if you're a master trust or a GPP provider, you've got much more skin in the game and the need to provide that decumulation solution yourself.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, another question came in. This is from Ben Stafford, and Ben's at Just. Quite a long question, but he's asking about Pensionwise. He said the FCA estimates that only 15% of the people at the moment are using Pensionwise. A recent MAPS report suggested that nudge approaches led to only a marginal increase in usage. What does the PLSA advocate to ensure use of Pensionwise becomes the norm at the point of access, just as auto-enrollment has become a norm at the point of entry? Wouldn't this be a good first step?
Yeah, shall I come in on that one? So yeah, I mean, absolutely. Pensionwise is there to help. We would want to continue to support that. I think it would become a key part of the customer journey and the communications that would go out as part of our package under that, depending how you number them, one of those three arms. So it's something that we would definitely support. I guess there's always a little bit of a challenge where there's a break in the customer journey and they have to move from one place to another, and that might be behind why some of the take up isn't as we may have hoped. But the solution that we're offering is definitely about utilising and maximising the source of all of that help and support as well.
And then certainly from a provider point of view, we've been talking to Pensionwise about how can we remove some of those barriers that Lizzie talked about. You know, can we automate you're on a call talking to a member about their retirement options, you know, they want more than the information that we can give them. Can we then, you know, just do an automatic transfer through to Pensionwise at that point? So it's trying to smooth out some of these barriers. And we know from auto-enrollment that keeping things smooth and automatic is what really works. So I think that would be another option that we should think about, you know, the mechanics of how all of this happens.
Yeah, thank you. One that's just come in from Tony Pugh links a little bit to this. He says, have you considered the risks and costs for members transferring from their own trust to a decumulation product? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but would you like to sort of comment a little bit on how we mitigate those risks as well as possible? Which one of you wants to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take that first. I'm sure Lizzie has comments as well, James. And I think it's a really good point that Tony makes, because, you know, within your own trust scheme, you may be de-risking members into a certain position. You know, maybe that's designed so that they can go and buy drawdown, but then they potentially have to sell all of that and then go and buy into another drawdown solution. So at that point, you know, you've got transaction costs, mismatch at the very point when your pot is the biggest that it's ever going to be. So I think actually dovetailing some of these solutions so that once you know I've signposted X as my decumulation solution, you know, it is possible for the trustees to then think about their de-risking pathway. So it ends up in, you know, broadly the same position as it will be picked up in, you know, in the master trust, in the GPP, in the signposted solution. And certainly, you know, at Legal & General, we have done some work with schemes to make that journey as smooth as it can be, that can even go to the extent of re-registering units across from the own trust scheme into the master trust scheme. So that, you know, that's a very extreme example of how smooth you can make it. Tends to work better for the larger schemes that have the larger pots to transfer. But I think all of these considerations will need to come into play, because it is all about how do we make it easy and cost efficient for the members to make that move.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Lizzy, anything to add? Not compulsory?
Probably not on such a technical level, but I think, you know, some of the things that we want to put in place in terms of the consumer engagement journey are hopefully preparing consumers for this journey. We've got elements in there which are about, well, what happens if somebody doesn't engage, and making sure they're on the right kind of investment strategy if they haven't engaged, to try and kind of smooth out some of those shocks or those hard edges. I think also as the market develops, kind of keeping an eye to the kind of longer term as well. That hopefully some of those things will develop and evolve as we go forward, and there's plenty of scope in there for kind of best practice as well. I think what we're trying not to do is be so cautious that we don't make a step change and that we don't move things forward, but it doesn't mean we have an answer to everything right now, and it doesn't mean there isn't sort of further work to do on some of these details, I think I'd say.
And Tony's just typed in the box, that's a good answer, so well done. And he is also concerned about moving members to higher cost retail solutions. So
indeed, yeah. And so am I, James. Yeah, I think that's one that we need to work on. Yeah.
And we're probably not going to have time for all the questions, although I have to say we will ask Emma and Lizzy to answer any unanswered questions and ping those answers round as well. Let's just take one last one. It's from an anonymous attendee who says, what immediate solutions is the PLSA putting forward to make consolidation of multiple member pots easier, quicker and more cost effective? Most DC schemes now have more deferred members than actives. We can't wait for the dashboard, as there's too much lost value by members while we wait. Emma, I can see you nodding, so what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, that massively relevant question, because, you know, decumulation is the one point when you want all of your pots to come together so that you are looking at it as a whole rather than just at little separate bits that you've got everywhere. And, you know, yes, I'm you know, eagerly anticipating the dashboard, but I think that the industry is really now, you know, trying to build their own solutions here. So, you know, there's pot consolidation solutions out on the market. Interesting to see the success of people like Pensions B. You know, there's obviously demand out there for this kind of thing. And, you know, certainly it's something that, you know, I know at Legal & General we're working on in terms of making it really easy for people to consolidate their pots. I'm sure plenty of other providers in the market are doing the same. So, you know, yes, we all want the dashboard to come, but I agree we probably can't wait for that. And so we are building solutions that will help members see everything in the same place, even if that's tracing to start off with, followed potentially by consolidation, because clearly there are some issues about whether it's right always to consolidate different pots. But if at least you can see what you've got, that's got to be so important for this whole decumulation discussion.
Yeah. Okay, great. And as I said, we do have a few unanswered questions, but we will send answers around to those. So we're going to have to draw this to a close so we can finish on time. Thanks to everyone who's dialed in this and participated. We had 173 people as the highest figure I saw online at one time, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, Emma and Lizzy, for your fantastic contributions today. And also a particularly big thanks from me to three wonderful sets of unseen hands who make all this happen magically behind the scenes. That's my great colleagues, Rebecca Mosel and Ellie Halls and Rachel Pine, and they've done a great job for us all. Otherwise, thanks all for dialing in. Wish you an enjoyable Tuesday afternoon and keep well. Thank you. Goodbye.